I warmly welcome you to the House this morning, Minister Helen. As the Minister will be aware, one of the many repercussions of the lockdown policies has been the dramatic increase in incidents of domestic violence, with vulnerable women and children bearing the brunt of this. In light of this, I want to put a few issues and questions to the Minister for her consideration. I have heard reports that the family law system further endangers women and children experiencing domestic violence. Abusive parents can be granted unsupervised access to children. Victims' concerns about child abuse are minimised. Custody arrangements which escalate domestic violence can be ordered by the courts. Next, are there any responses from the Oversight Group for reform of the family justice system regarding regulation, establishment of the database of court-appointed child welfare assessors? I understand these assessors are unregulated at present and the court service do not maintain any database of them. Simultaneously, involvement in proceedings in the criminal court, the family court in the child protection system are not unusual in families affected by DSGBV. This can lead to considerable difficulties. A mother may be required by TUSLA to leave an abusive partner to protect her children, while in family law proceedings the parental rights of the abusive partner may supersede the child's rights to safety, sometimes giving rise to unsupervised access to abusive partners. This re-traumatises the affected child or abused mother and places them in direct conflict with welfare conditions arising from involvement with TUSLA. A conviction for violent abuse of the victimised parent, frequently the mother, may be deemed irrelevant in a custody or access case because the offence was not against the child. Can a fit-for-purpose, joined-up legal and welfare mechanism ensure that these matters are fully considered in terms of the emotional abuse element and effect of the child's welfare? Have the Gardaí started training officers in domestic violence refuge services to facilitate and encourage victims to report crimes? What are the statistics on the breaching of domestic court orders under Domestic Violence Act 2018 and how are repeat offenders being dealt with? How many prosecutions have there been for DSGBV since the pandemic began in March 2020? How does this compare to other years? Can the Minister update the House on the legislative proposal for domestic violence leave, which aims to give workers who experience domestic violence the stability they need to leave a violent relationship or to ensure they or their families are safe? Professionals who provide the vital supports and services needed by women and children in their communities must be adequately resourced. They are very much frontline workers. The third national strategy of DSGBV is due at the end of 2020. Do we have the luxury of waiting until then for these findings, knowing that this problem is escalating, under-resourced and under-reported? Can preliminary findings be published? An audit of accommodation is due by TUSLA at the end of April. Why is it taking so long when we know there is escalating violence emerging? It is clear we do not have enough refuge places. Hundreds of women and children in dire need are being turned away. What other accommodation measures have been put in place for victims fleeing? Is a multi-annual funding model being developed at department level to ensure and enable proper planning and development of DSGBV services? A new feature of the DSGBV has emerged during the pandemic, namely the deliberate breaching of COVID public health advice and restrictions. This places children and adults, particularly those with underlying medical conditions and disabilities, in danger. These offences are difficult to prove to a criminal threshold and equally difficult for victims to provide themselves or their children from it. How are those allegations, complaints being dealt with? Finally, I must repeat a call for more funding for services for victims and for an increase in the number of refuge places. What is the government's response? Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Senator. Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to Senator Keogan for raising such an important issue. Unfortunately, what COVID-19 has done is highlighted this as I suppose, an issue that existed long before now, but unfortunately for many of us, as I've said many times, while we've been asked to stay at home, home is a sanctuary for us, for others it's anything but, and it has placed additional pressure on individuals and victims in particular of domestic sexual violence. This is a priority for me. As I've said, COVID-19 has created unprecedented challenges, particularly for those experiencing domestic abuse, but also the frontline organisations that provide the support and services. At the outset, my department developed an interagency plan to address and to prioritise tackling domestic abuse during the pandemic. It's now leading efforts to try and identify lessons which can be learned. So while this is ongoing, the work, we're trying to make sure that we can learn lessons from everything that we're doing. Domestic abuse cases continue to be prioritised by the Gardaí, the Court Service and by the Legal Aid Board. The courts continue to deal with applications to renew domestic violence orders, which are due to expire, and to put in place arrangements to deal with matters remotely. Under Operation Fuisah, which is with An Garda Síochána, they're working to ensure victims of domestic abuse are supported and protected at this time, and the Senator will be aware of a huge amount of work that's been done in our own County Meath by Garda Stacey Luby and others to highlight domestic violence and to raise funds for vital organisations locally. In this area, I welcome recent convictions also for coercive control. This is something we've seen for the very first time in the last few months, and I hope that as more convictions follow, others will feel confident to come forward and to tell their story. Through the Still Here campaign, my department is working with frontline service providers, continuing to tell them that services are still available regardless of the level of restrictions, and in particular restrictions on movement that do not apply to people seeking help as a result of domestic abuse. We'll continue to get that message out, and I would stress that message today. We are also providing COVID-specific funding to organisations working in the area of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence to help during this difficult time, and that's separate to funding that would normally be provided for these organisations. How we best provide for the physical and emotional needs of victims going forward is an absolute priority. The Justice Plan 2021, which I launched only a few months ago, is a detailed action plan for delivering of our 5 high-level goals, and one of these goals is to strengthen community safety, reduce reoffending and support victims and combat domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. One of the key actions being undertaken is an audit, as the Senator has mentioned, of how domestic, sexual and gender-based violence policy and services is organised under the Government. This work, together with the audit of accommodation, is being undertaken currently by TUSLA, and work being done to implement supporting a victim's journey. And bringing all 3 of these together, they will provide, I think, the analysis that is needed to make sure that we address any gaps in our national approach and to ensure that it is effective and, most importantly, victim-centred. Minister O'Gorman and I met with the auditors only last week, and we look forward to receiving the report shortly. Perhaps maybe just to touch on a few points that the Senator mentioned, through supporting a victim's journey, which I met with the implementation group and also with the community and voluntary sector last week. The point that you raised around the family court and often that there are civil and criminal proceedings happening at the same time, but there is no connection. That's something that we're very conscious of and looking to address. It is difficult at the same time for the very reasons that you've outlined. We need to make sure that those 2 elements of the court are speaking to each other, so there is engagement between the implementation of supporting a victim's journey group and the Family Justice Oversight Group, which is currently doing a huge amount of work to try and overhaul the family justice structure itself. In terms of An Garda Síochána training, all of the Gardaí involved in the Divisional Service Protective Units, all of which have been rolled out now, have received their training, and there's work underway to ensure that all members of An Garda Síochána receive updated training when it comes to domestic, sexual, gender-based violence. In terms of funding, we are working on a model which would see organisations receive funding on a multi-annual basis, and this is part of mapping a victim's journey. This is where we've identified what supports are currently available, how they're being provided, where there are gaps, and how we can provide further funding and support for these organisations to increase that funding. That will obviously require a commitment longer than the year, so that's where we're looking at the multi-annual funding, and I'll come back on some of the others.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Keogan.
Thank you, Minister McEntee. And I want to thank Dr Evelyn Parsons in Ballinasloe for highlighting this issue with me, and indeed she was instrumental in me putting forward this question to you here today. And I think, for women out there that are suffering, I know that the local authorities are very much involved in sourcing and funds for them to move out of a dangerous situation in a home. So I know that in County Meath that our housing officers would have certainly looked after a number of families, a number of women who found themselves in domestic abuse and they were able to arrange funding for them to be able to get out of that home and get out of that dangerous situation. Obviously, a lot more work needs to be done on this, and you can recognise the crossover between the Department of Justice and the Department of Children. It's great to see that they're still here, services are still operating there. Look, there's an awful lot more that needs to be done with this, Helen, or Minister McEntee, and you recognise that. I want to wish yourself and Paul every good wish going forward, a safe and healthy birth of your child. And if there's a number of questions there that you haven't really answered today in relation to numbers and that, so if I can forward them on to your department, maybe somebody in your department will be able to answer those for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
Absolutely. While I don't have the exact figures, what we do know is there's been a significant increase in reports and obviously in the Gardaí engaging with victims of domestic violence over the last year. It had increased from 2019 to 2020 and has increased even further since the pandemic. So obviously this is something I'm very conscious of. The work that we're doing now at the moment to support victims through COVID-19 will continue as long as it's needed, but we will very much ensure that the lessons that need to be learned from that will be fed into not just supporting a victim's journey, which is around improving the criminal justice system and encouraging more people to come forward, supporting them to come forward, but also it will be fed into the third national strategy on domestic sexual gender-based violence, of which we're currently doing an audit on the second, to make sure that we can identify what has been implemented, what hasn't, and where we need to go next. You asked about the refuge, the audit that's been taking place, which is due to be finalised shortly through TUSLA, will identify exactly where there are gaps in the system, where there needs to be further support. But as you've outlined, and it's not just the Department of Environment and Housing, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, the Department of Children, my own department and many others have a part to play in this and very much engaged and involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.